I'm Mason Mount. You're listening to the London is Blue podcast.
All right, Chelsea fans, welcome back to an emergency edition. That is right, emergency edition of the London is Blue podcast. Dan is here right now. That's me. And Brandon calling in. He's on the line. Took time away from his weekend up at the cabin on the shores of some lake in Minnesota to join us to talk about all the craziness that's happened in the last 24 hours. And really, to come clean on the fact that he made one of the worst predictions of all time that immediately got thrown into the bin.
Yeah, that backfired pretty violently in my face in the last 24 hours after predicting David Luiz would log the most minutes in the Premier League. So David, we hung out, man. You did me dirty.
Well, we will capture all of that emotion. We will talk about the David Luiz saga, his end to his time at Chelsea for the imagined to be the last time. We're going to go into what this means for our defense in the upcoming season and this weekend at Old Trafford. And we're going to talk about, does this now affect, or what are the effects of transfer deadline day on Chelsea's shot at top four? But we couldn't get Nick in, couldn't get Mike in. We had to throw up a bat signal. And of course, Joe Tweeds always answers the call. Joe, are you ready to get in and talk a little bit about the craziness of the last 48 hours for 48 Hour FC Chelsea Football Club?
Club chaos, let's go.
All right, well, we will jump in. First and last reminder, because if you're listening to this after kickoff, Liverpool versus Norwich to start the Premier League, for you to join our Patreon exclusive fantasy Premier League that we're doing. We're giving away a kit to the winner of both the classic and the head-to-head groups that we've got going on. If you want to head over to patreon.com/London Blue Pod, you can get more details there. But it's pretty exciting. We're having a lot of great conversation on Discord about it. But we're jumping in. We're jumping in because only Chelsea can make the biggest waves on a transfer deadline day where we are unable to sign players. And somehow Liverpool has joined us in solidarity with that. We appreciate that. Shockwaves have rippled out from SW6 yesterday when the rumors first broke that David Luiz would potentially look to swap blue for red, trophies for tears, fortresses for a library by forcing a move to Arsenal. And now it's been confirmed. Joe, let's just take a minute and break down the following. It's how the F does this happen right before the start of the season, right before Frank Lampard has set everything in place for what should be a really, really, great and momentous change and step forward for the club?
Yeah, I mean, it's first of all, it's a little bit crazy that we've sort of come to the last few hours of the transfer window, and potentially a key player that I think a lot of Chelsea fans would have assumed played pretty significant part this season has departed for a local rival or rival for a top four place. I think how this happened, you maybe have to go back to maybe the roots of some of this, which is, anecdotally, sort of Luiz and Lampard were never the best of colleagues in terms of teammates. And I have a feeling that when Lampard came here, that potentially that, let's say that sort of relationship dynamic was probably in the back of Luiz's mind. And from what I've been hearing from people who have links to the club, I don't think that over the next few days, as some of the stories get pushed from Chelsea side through Matt Law and various other guys, I don't think it's going to be a really, let's say, a really sort of fair, or maybe not fair, maybe a positive reflection on David Luiz's sort of role here. So the sort of general narrative is that when Lampard came back to the club, he was very much on the sort of train of giving people a clean slate. And that pretty much involved, sort of telling some of the senior professionals that, you're not just going to play because you've been here for X number of years and you've won trophies, etc. Everyone needs to sort of earn their place. And I think that originally kind of put Luiz a little bit on the back foot. And I think over the course of pre-season, I think that has somewhat festered. And after Zuma and Christensen started the last pre-season game, probably a fairly good indication of who was going to play at Old Trafford. I think Luiz has kind of taken that to effectively say that he's not going to be the first choice this season, and has pretty much pushed through a move from his side since then. there are a lot of people around the club who are saying that Luiz has not sort of been the same. He's not looked the same. This comes from people who have spent time with the club in Germany, and there were some rumours about Lampard and Luiz in particular getting in an argument over some sloppy play in one of the first halves of the game. So it feels to me like it's a situation that's maybe been simmering for a while. And I think coming to a head this week, I think it's mostly seems to have come from Luiz's side that he's been sort of quoted to the second string. And I think one of the things I will say quickly is this sort of notion that he's told he's going to be fourth choice is a little bit untrue, because Lampard typically sees sort of two groups of centre-backs. You've kind of got the ball players, which is Luiz and Christensen, and then you've kind of got sort of the more, let's say, physical, the more aggressive centre-back, which is likely going to be sort of the Rudigers, the Zumas, the Tomori. So there was only really going to be sort of one spot available in each of the roles, the sort of balanced kind of centre-back view that he has. And as someone who was quite vocal, and I've been quite vocal, suggesting that I think Luiz would be my starting centre-back, that Christensen maybe isn't as good in the two. I think Christensen probably has outperformed in this pre-season. I think Luiz has looked a little bit sloppy in his minutes, and I think Lampard has made a decision, maybe taking more of a meritocratic approach to team selection and gone with Christensen. And I think Luiz hasn't reacted very well to that. He hasn't apparently reacted well to this view that he's not going to be sort of one of the first names on the team sheet, and it comes across a little bit entitled from his perspective. But now it seems that he is engineered a move to Arsenal, stays in London. Obviously, he's got some ties here, both familial and business-wise as well. So it feels a little bit, maybe not entirely similar to the sort of Peter Cech situation a few years ago. It felt a little bit more forced from his side, but I think it just comes down to squad dynamics and Lampard and the coaching staff not wanting a disruptive influence in the squad over the course of the season, because it feels like Luiz was maybe not being the most professional about the situation, and I think that has culminated in him moving on today.
Yeah, and that's going to be the type of news. And obviously, we are reacting to this in the moment. We are trying to be maybe thoughtful around the way we approach it, because it's very easy to be extremely hyperbolic in these moments. But I know, Brandon, you talked about at the start that you didn't know how you were going to necessarily react or how you're going to feel about this. Hearing a little bit of Joe's kind of thoughts around it, thinking about your own reaction and processing it, how are you feeling about seeing David Luiz now in an Arsenal kit being announced by them, and seeing Arsenal Fan TV basically act like he's the second coming of the best center back they've ever had?
Well, I'm literally on Arsenal FC News right now, seeing him jumping with his arms pumped and his fists clenched, him holding up a David Luiz kit, number 23, in front of the Arsenal crest, and he is grabbing his jersey and fist pumping, just missing the badge. I understand why he wants guaranteed minutes at this stage in his career. Like, I get it. Like, when your career is close to wrapping up, you want to maximize. And to be fair, I don't know, a lot of people, probably including us, have given Drinkwater a hard time for sitting in the reserves collecting 6 figures a week, saying he's not professional. To be fair, this is David Luiz saying, I'm going to refuse to play. I don't care what my wages are. I want to play. We can't talk out both sides of our mouth. And so I think that, this is what he wanted to do. I understand. It is just the circumstances that make it the worst for the club. He went to Arsenal, an on-the-field, off-the-field rival, an table rival surely this season, and Chelsea let him go for peanuts to a team who desperately need defensive help. This might actually be worse than giving them Petr Cech originally. This actually might help them even more than what we did by giving them Petr Cech a few years ago. I understand and empathetic to David Luiz, but the timing and the destination from a club's perspective are baffling.
Yeah, I think to your point, the optics of this scenario are so different, where Petr Cech was basically, he knew he was going to be number 2. He wasn't getting a renewed contract. He understood that he still had time to play and wanted to live in London, worked with the club to get approval from Abramovich to transition to Arsenal, which, he was going to give him 15 points extra a season. That didn't happen, and we appreciated that. Came back to the club in his new role, and I don't think anyone bears any ill will towards him. I think the optics of this moment, though, club serving a transfer ban, the leadership leaking out of the club in terms of players who have been there and done that. We now no longer have a member in the playing squad who was there in that Champions League final. Luiz was the last one. Obviously, we have some who are back now in a technical or in a coaching or managerial role. So that changes a little bit of the dynamic. You go from being considered one of the starters to now not moving him out of the lineup and kind of understanding we're going to have to flex a little bit because he was in the preseason plans, and going across town to Arsenal. It just doesn't look good in any capacity, even though when you take a step back and say, well, if I know I'm not going to get minutes, if I know that I can force a move, I know that I can go actually play 38 matches plus and rejoin my favorite competition in the world, the Europa League, for this season, I can go get that done. Joe, I think maybe from the perspective of Arsenal, it's really shrewd and smart business for them, and actually I think helps, even though some people are kind of joking that David is going to have a couple of sideshow bomb moments and actually concede some more and help us out. What do you think about that?
I think one of the things I love about this podcast in particular, and you guys, is that the sort of the chase for the sort of clickbait stuff and the hot takes isn't quite there. So I think if I'm answering this question and trying to be sensible about it, I think it's far too early to kind of tell who sort of has won or lost on this deal. If you look at the Chelsea perspective, maybe from a positive perspective, if you have removed let's say a disruptive influence from the squad, someone who potentially was not seen as first choice by the coaching staff, who maybe doesn't or no longer has the athletic profile of the centre-backs and how you want to play the high line, etc. Maybe not necessarily playing to his strengths, then from a Chelsea perspective, that can be seen as a positive. Yes, you're losing leadership, but on the other hand, it also opens up sort of room for some of the younger players to grow into those roles. And I often feel sometimes with Chelsea, where we've had such a massive sort of chasm between the experienced players and the younger players, that the younger players have often found it difficult to sort of assume leadership roles or to grow into a more prominent position in the squad because they're sort of blocked by the characters of some of the players ahead of them. Also, there has been a thing around Chelsea around some of these sort of Brazilian and Spanish cliques at the club that I think they've wanted to not sort of break up, but sort of loosen some of the sort of stranglehold they've had on the dressing room. So potentially, I think that there's some element of play in there as well. From an Arsenal perspective, they've got a serial winner coming into the squad in David Luiz, and that's not something that you can really associate with Arsenal in any capacity. You've got someone who's experienced, someone who, despite sort of the general opinion of him, someone who generally plays well in big games. I think that's one of the things that they've lacked in recent seasons, is a commanding centre back in the bigger games. He obviously probably fits Arsenal's kind of style of play, but obviously in terms of how he's more of a ball playing centre back and things of that nature. But I think ultimately it's a little bit too soon to tell. If he goes and plays 38 games for Arsenal and they finish in the top four, then I think it's a fairly foregone conclusion on who was the winner in terms of the transfer deal. But if Chelsea can finish above Arsenal, when you see some growth from, let's say, probably Andreas Christensen benefits from this the most, if you can see some growth from him and see him sort of step into that sort of position in the back four, then it's going to be Chelsea. But I think, from sort of summing up, I think it's a little bit too soon to tell. Chelsea will think that they've got rid of a player who has, by all accounts, not been particularly professional over the course of pre-season and was becoming slightly disruptive in terms of the squad. Obviously, that is a positive move from them in that respect. They've still lost a good player, and I think Arsenal will see it as taking a player from a rival, adding experience to the squad, adding a player who probably is now their best centre-back, and sort of someone who, at least in terms of a winning mentality, can sort of give that to some of the other players. So At the moment, I'd say fairly even, but time will tell when we look back in maybe a couple of months' time and see who's really benefiting from the move.
What about player power? I mean, you talk about David Luiz, and when he's upset, it definitely ripples through the squad. I think this could affect Willian, which is going to bomb another one of my predictions. I freaking predicted him to potentially be the player of the season. I think this will affect Willian negatively. I mean, at least remember they own the Babbo restaurant. They're both still in London, so they'll both see each other plenty. But I just feel like he will perceive this as Lampard potentially feeling threatened or just treating his friend poorly, Dan. And I think that, I think that Willian will have resentment toward Frank at this point. And Willian is now the most experienced player in the squad. And knowing that he can have attitude problems, I mean, think of the trophy gate emoji that he did with Conte after winning the FA Cup. I mean, you can't discredit some of that stuff. I saw Dan Silva's tweet. This is Frank Lampard's dressing room. You either in or get the F out. So I'm just wondering what other effects this might have on the club and the squad this late in the window.
I tend to think about the idea of galvanizing moments, moments in time where the opportunity to shift, the addition by subtraction. And if David Luiz going means that there's an uptick in positivity, that if there were one or two or a group of players who were able to band together and create a negative atmosphere, again, this is hypothetically because we're not in the locker room, right? We are not there. It's all the reports that leak out via social media, spin jobs by club-friendly reporters and not club-friendly reporters, player-friendly reporters, their agents. So we're just trying to piece all the facts together. But let's say, for the hypothetical sense, that this was a problem. You had players who were grouping together and could cause shifts back or forward in the support for a manager or against a manager. You look at the likes of Reece James coming in. You have Mason Mount, Ruben Loftus-Cheek, Christian Pulisic, these young core group of players who clearly identify with Frank, they identify with Jody, they identify with this coaching staff, and you're looking to create a model that is going to persist, that is going to be able to weather the storm of a particularly crazy and chaotic season that lies ahead in terms of how we can adapt and how we can grow, and can we scale quickly enough to remain as competitive as we need to be to advance into the Champions League, to get deep into and potentially win a domestic cup and retain top four. So as we potentially either get our January ban removed or sign players in the summer, that we maintain an attractive position for players to be signed. I think this could be ultimately a very positive moment, depending upon how this ripples out and how Frank and the management team really sees this moment, Joe. I think we could win, not necessarily from a financial perspective or from a player going across and like the legacy piece there. I think we win potentially in how this can impact the players of the squad who were planning to and are on the books for longer than David really was going to be at this point in his career.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair assessment. And when you sort of look at the social group that Luiz has, I think Willian is the obvious one, but I don't think many Chelsea fans envision that he will be here in the long term. Maybe that 2-year contract was probably to see him to the end of this season, and then with a view to trying to get sort of keep some money and sort of sale-wise at the end of the season. You've got Kennedy, who probably isn't a very prominent player. Emerson, who again is part of the sort of Italian, Brazilian sort of clique, same as Jorginho. I think those two players have probably not had enough time with Luiz to maybe have the sort of same relationship that someone like Willian has. So it kind of seems to be probably Willian is the main sort of point of contention, but whether he will be a real sort of focal point of the team this season, I'm unsure. And I think also going forward, I think it's a really, really good point to make that this kind of approach seems to really, I would say, kind of show that the pathway for younger players is now there. That if you have some experienced professionals, maybe some who I think a lot of Chelsea fans would have seen Luiz still potentially as as an untouchable. You know, if these guys are being moved on because they're not pulling in the same direction as the club, and that direction being one where we are apparently getting younger. I think we, you know, if you look at some of the older players, if they are not playing in, let's say, a League Cup game, you know, that could probably be one of the youngest starting 11s that we'll have seen in an Abramovich era. So, you know, for next summer, potentially in January, if we get a successful appeal for the transfer ban, all of a sudden Chelsea looks to be, I think, a very appealing prospect for some of the younger talent across the globe. And I know Chelsea fans are very interested in someone like Jadon Sancho. Jadon Sancho being a boyhood Chelsea fan, you know, one of Callum Hudson-Odoi's best friends, etc. So I think that this kind of move maybe is something that pays dividends later, when we're able to sort of start looking at players again. It suggests to me that, you know, there is going to be a genuine meritocratic approach to team selections, that it doesn't matter what you've done at Chelsea. It's kind of what you're doing right now. And no one really is bigger than the club. And the kind of interesting thing for me is that I think Luiz is probably the last player that has that sort of cozy relationship, or had that cozy relationship with the owner. And the fact that Lampard has been backed ahead of him, I think, is a very kind of, could be potentially a watershed moment for the club. You know, it's something that we've often spoken about across numerous podcasts, sort of historically, about the player power implications at Chelsea. And for the first time in a very long time, it's now sort of seems that a manager has complete control over the makeup of the squad. And I think for some of the senior players, maybe that is, you know, something that sort of kicks them into gear, that they can't sort of rest on their laurels, and, you know, they can't sort of rely on some of the goodwill that they've accrued and banked over their sort of careers at Chelsea. But it's definitely an interesting thing. And I think over the next few days, as sort of more of the sort of kind of story is released publicly, I think it's going to paint Lampard probably in a pretty good light in how he's dealt with the situation. And I think, again, you know, that as we look sort of towards the future, in the near future, that this could be a moment where a lot of younger players now look at Chelsea and think, hang on a minute, you know, this isn't a club that I'm going to go and sign at 22, 23 and not play because, you know, they've got a host of experienced players. It's going to be a club that I can actually go and sort of attack the starting 11, try and attack a position and try and nail it down. And I know that I'm going to get a fair crack of the whip. And, you know, the fact that Luiz maybe has decided not to accept the challenge that's been laid down to him in terms of fighting for his position, you know, I think that suggests that, you know, it's a level playing field for everyone. And I think that can only benefit the squad going forward.
Well, let us know what you think about the David Luiz situation. Hit us up on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, snail mail, and whatever it is that you want to use to discuss this moment. Obviously, a lot to take into that. We'll do a quick ad break, and then we'll get back to talk about what this means for Chelsea in the weekend match against United, and then also for the remainder of the season, and how does this move impact us in our quest for top four, for fighting for everything we're looking to achieve this coming season. Jake, here's your clap for the break. All right, we are back after that very, very quick break. And now we're going to dive in to what this means for Chelsea's defense moving forward into this season. So many people, as we talked about already, had David Luiz penciled in as potentially that surefire starter for that ball-playing center back ahead of Christensen. But now he's gone. We're not going to talk about it anymore. We're talking about who still is here, which is Christensen, Rudiger, Tomori, and Zuma as our center back opportunities. You could even potentially throw Azpilicueta in as a cover option. But as we think about maybe just first the short-term situation, which is upcoming Sunday, Old Trafford, first match of the Premier League season, points on the line. Joe, I feel like it's probably got to be Christensen and Zuma for this upcoming match, but is there any kind of thought where it might be different, or is that the right pairing for at least this moment now?
Yeah, I think with Rudiger out, it's almost kind of the default option for the time being. It will be interesting to see when Rudiger comes back, who potentially makes way. I think that Lampard has shown a tendency to sort of look for balance in his centre-backs, and maybe that's sort of drawing inspiration on some of his his sort of sides that he's played in with sort of Terry and Gallas, Terry Cavallo, etc., where you've got a more physical player, a more aggressive centre back, and someone who was a little bit more technical, a little bit more of a sweeper in terms of the team. Kind of puts Christensen in pole position for the time being, if that is the approach that Lampard wants to take. Part of me thinks that he may eventually settle on a physical centre-back pairing, which will be Rudiger and Zuma. But it really, I think, will depend on how sort of performances go in the early part of the season. I don't think that Lampard is just going to play people, if they're not performing. And, I think looking particularly at Zuma, I've not been super impressed with him during pre-season. I'm maybe not putting as much stock in that as other people, but again, someone who's a pretty big fan of him, I don't feel that he has necessarily kind of grabbed the shirt, over the course of pre-season. But I imagine for the game against Manchester United that Christensen and Zuma will be the kind of preferred pairing. And it's a huge opportunity for Fikayo Tomori. At the moment he's the third choice. Probably will stay this season as the fourth choice centre back. But this is a guy who a lot of people see quite a lot of potential in him as a player. I think he's still raw in a lot of aspects, and I think a lot of that is down to experience. I think it was, maybe in hindsight now, looking back on it, it was a little bit fishy that he hadn't gone out on loan. And maybe now we can kind of see why he's been kept around the club for this season. But I think it will be Zuma and Christensen. But as soon as Rudiger is back fit, I think primarily because of his experience and his leadership qualities that he has, that I think he potentially now becomes a fixture sort of in the starting two. And then it's going to be, for me, probably one of Christensen or Zuma will pair him for the sort of the kind of foreseeable future. But Sunday almost certainly now will be a huge opportunity for Christensen and Zuma to stake their claim as the first choice pairing. And who knows, if they play particularly well, if things look solid with them at the back, then they will keep the jerseys, I think, for the foreseeable future, even with Rudiger coming back. So pressure's on. I think that it's going to be something that is very dependent on performance level now, which maybe is not something that we've seen over the past couple of seasons with the managers we've had. They've kind of played guys kind of irrespective of form. So it's up to Zuma and it's up to Christensen to keep those positions now. And with Rudiger competing for a spot, hopefully that competition sort of sharpens their performance levels and we see a decent performance Sunday and hopefully going forward as well.
So, Brandon, I'm going to guess that you agree with Joe, at least for this coming weekend. But you did make the claim, we got to talk about it just for a second, that Luiz would get the most minutes at Chelsea this season. Would you like to revise your pick, and who would that pick be?
No, I'm sticking with it. He'll do it. This kind of changes. It makes me kind of think about a lot of different things now and how Frank's going to approach this. I mean, to me, this is a pretty big confidence play that he's going to be here for 2 seasons, that he's not playing it safe in season 1. So all of a sudden, you feel like maybe he's going to be investing a lot more in a patience play to make sure people get minutes. So I don't know. I mean, I guess Aspie seems like a decent guess, but a shocker could be Barkley out of nowhere. Just the way that Lampard has seemed to take on to him in preseason, he might get a boatload of minutes this season. So that'll kind of be my wild card because there's no more logic involved in this nonsense. I'm going for complete shock value at this point.
Brandon Busby, unhinged and off the rails, as it were. So, I think when I take a look at it, I definitely think, to your point, Joe, that this is Christensen's moment and opportunity. If he can't lock it down over this string of games and become that player that we saw potential in at Mönchengladbach on loan, the player that we saw before the breaking moment versus Barcelona, that this might be his last really great chance to cement a role and a pathway for his whole future at Chelsea. What do you think are the things within his game that you're seeing right now that he needs to be able to show to Frank to really lock down that position, both versus United this weekend and through this maybe first stretch of games before Rudiger is not an option to come in as he continues his rehab?
I think Christensen primarily is the archetypal confidence player. And I think we saw under Conte that confidence drain away, and it took him an incredibly long period of time to recover that confidence that he had lost. I think towards the back end of last season, he was playing particularly well. I think he's played particularly well in pre-season. I think with him, it's probably going to be the sort of physical aspects, how he now sort of kind of, let's say, changes his game to deal with some of the physical centre forwards. And I think probably that really at the moment is the only primary concern. Is I think sometimes, I don't want to use, it's maybe sort of simplifying it a little bit, but he comes across as a little bit too nice in how he defends. You know, he is very stylistically similar, I think, to Ricardo Carvalho, but he doesn't have Carvalho's kind of nasty streak that he had. You know, Carvalho would foul, he would cheat, he would pull people, he would be the sort of, you know, he was sort of the Voldemort of Chelsea. He was the master of the dark arts of defending. And I think Christensen sometimes is a little bit too kind of down the sort of the straight and narrow in terms of how he defends. So I'd like to see some of that come into his game, be a little bit more physical, a little bit more imposing, a little bit more aggressive. But I mean, it's going to really depend on the instructions that he has. You know, if he's being tasked to be the sweeper, the more technical player, I think that position suits him. But it's going to be a mixture of confidence, and I think just showing a willingness to be a bit more aggressive and a bit more physical, and then obviously seeing how he pairs with Zuma and how he pairs with Rudiger, because yeah, you know, he is I think a good ball playing centre back. He's comfortable in possession. You know, he is probably now, in terms of our centre backs, the player that can bring the ball out of defence, that can be the player that sort of instigates sort of passing moves and attacks from the back. But we need to now sort of see him grow into this role and become more confident, become more aggressive, both on and off the ball. And I think those are the things that he needs to work on over the course of the season. But, you know, as we say, until Rudiger comes back, that position is his. So, you know, I think we just need to see him grow into the role and hopefully develop a partnership with Zuma over the next few games that sees Chelsea become a little bit more solid at the back. But, you know, it's his shirt to lose for the time being. And, you know, if he becomes that aggressor, he gets a little bit more niggly, gets a little bit more of that sort of dark arts in his game, you know, he could still become a very good centre-back in the two. And it looks like he's going to have every opportunity to prove himself. And I think, again, you know, sort of rounding things off, he is very much a confidence player. And I think Lampard will try and instill that confidence in him. So it's very much for me now how kind of he reacts to the early portion of the season, because we do have some difficult games. You know, United, Liverpool and Leicester is quite a tricky start. I think he's probably going to play in all of those. So if he comes through those unscathed and gains confidence, then maybe we see him become a fixture in this Chelsea side for at least until the sort of situation with Rudiger becomes a little bit more apparent.
Well, we will see if we can get one of those owls sent to Professor Snape and try to get him to bring Christensen under the wing for a little bit of that grit and dark arts that you mentioned. Brandon, as you think about the point that Joe's talking about there, about those first couple games, you know, we were talking in our season preview about how difficult that opening stretch is for Chelsea. It's a pretty difficult run with United, Super Cup against Liverpool, Leicester at home. We do get then a couple of promoted sides, but it's not an easy start to the season. Knowing that the combination is going to be Christensen and Zuma for those first couple matches, most likely, how has your confidence been affected about, you know, in relation to what you think we can get out of those results, and how much we can maximize points and even potentially win a trophy, so to speak?
Well, you know, I mean, there's a lot of intangibles with leadership and kind of camaraderie and things you lose with it. But, you know, if you think about it, this is when Chelsea were at their best with Lampard, right? Like, adversity, he's almost kind of bunkering in like a Jose Mourinho-esque type mentality, being like, oh, this player who's been with us once and has won everything isn't interested in being a part of a team, only about himself. I'm here for team players. Like, he wasn't committed to you guys. I can start to see him, frame the narrative to the group to say, we've lost Ed Hazard, now we've lost David Luiz. I'm looking for players who want to play for Chelsea and not just, chase wages or something like that. I think I can start to see him frame the narrative. Now we just have to see how they respond to it, because Manchester United, day one of the Premier League season, I think we said this before, I feel kind of okay about it. I mean, they don't threaten me nearly as much as, sadly, an Arsenal now. I think United are 6 out of 6 when it comes to the kind of your big teams, especially they just lost Lukaku today. But, we have seen some issues with not being able to play the ball out of the back when we're under pressure. So now we have that situation. We've lost our best ball playing center back in that sense. So we'll have to see. As far as like long-term, success with the club, I don't know. I mean, we have to kind of wait and see how good these guys are going to be out there. There's been a lot of changes, and it's a long season, and how these guys hold up, if they stay healthy, how they deal with adversity, because adversity is going to come. That's when you really find out what we're going to get out of this team. But I mean, honestly, I don't think anyone can really predict or feel confident with how the season is going to go for Chelsea. There have been so many changes at the club at such a high level and with such big impact that this is a whole new looking team. This is a whole, this is a hard reset. When IT tells you to turn it off and turn it back on, that's what Chelsea did this summer. So I have no idea what's about to boot up.
No, they took a magnet to the hard drive. They did more than just. I think the way to look at it, though, and maybe kind of pull back and not just look at Chelsea, because Chelsea have been the one team, opposite Liverpool, who, in solidarity with our ban again, did not sign any players this summer. We appreciate the support. Very magnanimous of them. Lot of signings right on deadline day, but also a few kind of leading up to the end of the window. Tottenham sign Lo Celso, Sessegnon. Arsenal obviously completed the signing of Pepe, get David Luiz in, get Tierney in as well. United complete Maguire and AWB, Aaron Wan-Bissaka as their main signings. Joe, what's your concern about the top 4 finish likelihood now? I think when we talked in our preview pod, it was essentially 1 and 2 are on lock with the City-Liverpool finish. Spurs might be kind of in the contention there for probably a 3 or 4. And then it's really now 3 to 4 teams, especially if you consider the strengthening Wolves and Everton have done, that are going to maybe make that finish for a top 4 or even a top 6 much harder this season.
I must admit, I'm not super concerned, and this may be something that I'm probably being a little bit glass half full in there. I'm not super concerned with Arsenal's incomings. I think, Pepe is a good player, but if you now look at that front 3, that's a front 3 that is almost allergic to playing the other way, and with Arsenal's midfield, kind of, sort of the kind of porous nature there. I'm not sure how that's actually going to work in practice. It's one of those things that looks fantastic on paper, but we know that kind of forwards now have to contribute both ways, and it's not just a question of outscoring people. Tierney, again, the standard of football he's been playing, I think it's difficult to see where he is a massive upgrade. If he really hits it off at Arsenal, that's fair enough. And Luiz, I'm not sure if he is if he's really the answer to their sort of defensive issues that they've had over the past couple of seasons. Harry Maguire, I think, is he's not a Virgil van Dijk. He's not a De Ligt. He's not for me, an elite centre back. I think he obviously starts for United, but I don't think he is, again, someone who is sort of drastically going to impact them. I think Wan-Bissaka is an excellent defender, but I think, again, putting him in a team where the fullbacks are expected to almost be one of the sort of primary contributors going forward, that's not really been his game at Palace. He's more known as a sort of an excellent one-on-one defender, and Daniel James again is a little bit of an unknown quantity. So maybe the kind of the direct rivals for maybe that 4th spot, I'm not super concerned with at the moment. I mean, obviously it could all change if these signings sort of catch fire and and become incredible. Tottenham are an interesting one for me because I think, I've been a huge fan of Ndombele. I think he will really elevate them. Sessegnon, I think, really for me struggled last season, with the reputation that he came with as sort of being this, kind of next sort of Ashley Cole, Roberto Carlos, this sort of left-hand side dominant player. I didn't really see that in the Premier League, and it'd be interesting to see how he develops under Pochettino. And Lo Celso, I think, again, is another good player, but, it's one of those things that I'm not sure just how much he will elevate Spurs above what we saw last season. And, Tottenham have been perennially this team that everyone says is going to challenge for the title and challenge for the, trophies every single season, but they always tend to have that kind of period towards the end of the season where they sort of fall away. So, unless that drastically changes, and we're saying that these kind of signings that they've made really kind of stop that decline that we've seen towards the back end of the year. Again, maybe they're going to be in sort of in and around us a bit more. And I think Wolves and Everton and those sorts of teams, I think we'll see something akin to sort of, I'm not going to say the drop-off that Leicester experienced when they won the title, but, now people have got a lot more tape on them to watch and to analyse how they play. I think the teams sort of in and around them and lower than them in the league table will start giving them a bit more respect and play them a bit more like how they would a top 4 to 6 side traditionally. So I think that there's going to be more of an emphasis on these teams to actually take the initiative in matches now and not just counter-attack and not just be the team that counters excellently, and that is a big difference in terms of how they maybe are expected to play, and particularly Wolves, who I think were really good on the counter last season. If they are now going to be a team that other teams are going to kind of set up in a similar manner to counter them, then I think, again, that's a big dynamic change for them to become accustomed to. And I think Everton's front three is interesting. Again, I think at the moment that is, for me, something a little bit that looks great on paper, but we'll kind of again see how that transpires. So I'm kind of I'm looking at it in a little bit more of an optimistic fashion. I know there will be certain people that now think that we're becoming sort of mid-table because of the signings that have been made, but beyond City and Liverpool, I generally think that there are positions in the top 4 that are definitely up for grabs, and it's something that I think is definitely within our grasp. A lot of it will come down to, I think, whether we get a centre forward kind of take a step forward and become a focal point, and just how many goals we're able to sort of get to how many goal contributions we can get from the likes of Pulisic and Pedro and Hudson-Odoi when he's back, and yeah, I mean it's going to be interesting, but yeah, I mean I'm not as high on some of these signings as other people. I think that they will obviously improve the teams that they have, but whether it's to the extent that Chelsea now kind of drop down to 5th, 6th, 7th, whatever that's going to be, I'm not so certain about that.
All right. Love the optimism. Love you coming in with some positivity to bring into the conversation. Brandon, now, did that positivity work? Was that a shot of like wheatgrass juice for you? A little like something healthy, something good? Or are you kind of maybe on the opposite side? Are you feeling like there's potentially a little more regression now after seeing a couple of these signings that maybe you are now more concerned about?
Well, I think, I did predict top 4, knowing that, Tottenham turned it on right at the end a little annoyingly. I think United signings, kind of like Joe said, they're okay. But Arsenal, looking at their lineup now again, Arsenal, you got to put the pieces together, right? We see this. They put all the attacking talent out there in the world, but they can't play as a team. They can't play as a unit. So I think that still helps us. And hopefully Xhaka plays for them because, he's good for a red card about every 3 matches. So I think I'm still bullish on top 4 that Chelsea get 4th, even looking at some of these signings. But I do think that Arsenal and Tottenham turned it on right at the end, which was a little annoying, a little scary. And I still couldn't be bothered by Manchester United. I don't know why. It doesn't seem important, like aggressive or a threat to me at all, Dan.
Yeah, I think I align with that thought process. Is that I'm impressed that Arsenal somehow were to found a way to take their quoted 45 million and manage to spend 111 million pounds at the end of it all, which is some type of BOGO coupon that they must have been able to put together. When it comes to Spurs, I think the signings are interesting, and Ndombele is probably the one that is really exciting for them, probably the most exciting out of all of the signings across the other contenders for a top 4 finish that we've discussed. But yeah, I'm with both of you. I think, and maybe we could spend just a few more seconds talking about why we're bullish on top 4. I think when I look at it, to the point that Joe made, I'm only concerned about which striker is going to be the one that steps up and can truly start to add some of that goal contribution. What we saw from Barkley, Mount, Pulisic, Pedro in the preseason shows me that there's enough opportunity. There's going to be enough chances created to score. And now we have a couple of people that are maybe a little bit more of a natural finisher or more willing to take a shot on goal than we had in our midfield situation of Conte and Jorginho last season, where again, Conte comes in with 4 goal contributions. It's wonderful, but you want to potentially have someone like a Mount in there who can maybe get close to double digits or go beyond. Pulisic getting close to double digits, going beyond. Barkley, hopefully in the double digit scenario. And I think that there was enough there from preseason, at least from what our midfield, what our attacking contribution is going to offer outside of striker Joe, that's what's making me feel very confident right now about our ability to go out and get a top 4, because even if one of those players isn't functioning in a particular moment in time, it looks like we have enough kind of rotation within there to create the number of goals that are going to be required across all comps.
Tweeds, I don't think strikers are going to bang in the goals for us. It's going to be our wingers and whoever's in that number 10.
Yeah, I mean, we've never really traditionally relied on, a striker who's going to get, 28, 30 goals in the league. I mean, I think we've only maybe had Drogba and Costa as centre forwards who've hit 20 or more goals in a league season, in sort of the entire Abramovich era. So I think, traditionally Chelsea are a team that has, been able to sort of spread the goals around. We've always had centre-backs who pop up with goals. We've had midfielders who score. And, I think going forward that is going to be maybe the sort of strength of this new team. I think you're right. I think Pulisic has that skill set, I think, in the Premier League, where he has that ability to run in behind, that he will score goals. He looks to be a very accomplished finisher. Pedro, we know, can finish on his day. Willian can finish. I think Hudson-Odoi playing from the left-hand side will surprise people. I think that once he gets his feet back, I think he is someone who can score 10 goals in the league. I think he's more than capable of doing that. I think Ruben is worth 5 to 10 goals when he comes back. Barkley, Mount, these are all kind of players who, if they all start chipping in with 5, 6, 7 goals each, all of a sudden that sort of loss of 16 goals from Hazard, becomes fairly easy to sort of fill. And I'm not suggesting that by any stretch of the imagination that you replace the quality of Hazard as a player, but certainly the direct sort of goals that he's now left, I think that is something there's potential to fill in with players from other areas. And yeah, I think my only real concern for this season is that we don't currently have that sort of real focal centre forward who is the kind of de facto starter, who is the number one guy, who has the upside, the ability to really sort of dominate. And it's going to be a question of hopefully someone kind of stepping forward and taking the shirt. Even if it's a question of, they're taking the shirt because they fit the team structure best, or, because they get the best out of the wingers, or they link up better with midfield. It's going to be a question for me of that forward maybe not being a just straight up goal scorer, but someone who really fits the team structure that Lampard and co are looking to implement. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be I think no real kind of, no real reservations here that it's going to be a difficult season. I think it would have been difficult had we had, Guardiola in charge this season. It would have been difficult if we'd have had, any kind of elite manager here, let alone someone who is a bit of a rookie and is a bit of a gamble. But it will come down to, I think, Chelsea's ability to find goals from other areas of the pitch. And, I think that is going to be the approach that we have to take. And if we limit our losses, if we can limit our losses to the teams around us and not lose the games to the Bournemouths and the West Hams and the Watfords of the world that sort of we have maybe in the past couple of seasons. And I think that the potential to finish in the top 4 is there. And really, I mean, someone just sent me a graphic on WhatsApp looking at the Man United team without Paul Pogba, and it doesn't look fantastic. So, I mean, if we're looking at United as a direct rival for top 4 and maybe Arsenal, I don't think the gap between us and them is as great as what some people will make out. I think that we certainly have the strongest midfield options on paper. Arsenal maybe probably have got a better attack than us. I think we've probably got a better back 4. So it's just going to come down to really how things pan out during the season. Players need to step up and step into the roles that have been vacated, whether that's as goal scorers or leaders. But it's something that is going to have to happen this season for us to finish in the top 4. But I remain sort of quietly optimistic. I don't think that we are anywhere near as bad as some of sort of these very overtly negative sort of football Twitter Chelsea accounts have made out. I don't think that teams around us are all of a sudden going to become this world-class collection of players and go on and challenge City and Liverpool. I think it's fairly close. It really come down to, I think, some very, very small moments across the season, and in these small moments, you just have to hope that Chelsea can pull off the sort of the results that they require. So yeah, I mean, I'm maybe quietly optimistic. This may be stupid looking back on it in a year's time, but I think coming into this season, particularly looking at the midfield areas and maybe now seeing a different approach and a different way of playing, maybe the optimism will prove to be correct at the end of the season.
Well, that is what we like to shop around to listeners on our show, is not the doom and gloom. It's not the hot takes. It's not the football Twitter tweets. It's not the fake Andreas Christensen fan pages tweeting that are showing that there's no player bigger than the club quotes. We just want to bring it back to why we should be excited for this season. We talked a lot about that just now within the players that are coming back, about where the goals are going to come from with all this wonderful young talent, which, if it all comes together, gives us a foundation to build upon in the coming seasons. Means that we don't have to overspend on the likes of Danny Drinkwaters, who are going on loan to Burnley for 6 months, which is so flipping weird. And that is a reason to be happy, reason to be excited, reason to think when we go into Old Trafford this weekend, not as bad on paper, not as far of a gulf as maybe we are led to believe. There is an opportunity to take 3 points and start the season off with a bang. Joe, we're going to get out on that, but thank you so much for coming in, answering our call to action, and giving the people a little bit to be excited about.
Yeah, no problem, guys. It's as I said, I think it's what a weird summer for Chelsea. Not being able to buy anyone, but we still bought someone, and still managing to dominate the the kind of the final day of the transfer window from seemingly absolutely nowhere. So yeah, crazy club, but yeah, no problem for joining last minute.
Yeah, and Brandon, that's just as it said in the advert for the away kit. It's a Chelsea thing. It's what we do.
I guess so. We signed up for it. This is what we get. It would have been boring otherwise.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone who listened to this emergency episode. We will be back after the match against United, where Chelsea have won. We get 3 points, and we start the season off with a bang. But until then, you know what to do. Keep a blue flag flying high. All right. Brilliant, everyone. Brilliant. I did not get kicked out of this conference room, which is a good thing. Okay. Perfect. And Joe, if you want to shoot over like a WhatsApp link to the contact at London is Blue. Yeah, we transfer. Yes, we transfer. All right. Sounds good.